Hello everybody, I'm Dan Jackson, aka Dan the Engineer. Thank you for watching this video. This video is about electricians working on fire alarms. So I'm here in a place called Dolphin Point in New South Wales. I just want to show you, it's sunrise at the minute in Australia. It's a bit bright behind, but it's honestly stunning place. One of the most beautiful places I've ever stayed. I'm living on the beach. I'm living on this beach. It's great. So I want to open this video up by stating very clearly that just because you are an electrician does not mean you can work on fire alarm systems. I just want to make that very clear from the outset. I'm not suggesting for a second electricians should just go work on fire alarm systems, because they shouldn't. To me, it is a completely different trade. You don't learn fire alarms on your electrical training. It doesn't cover it. There's obviously parts such as cabling that you will cover, but in general it doesn't cover it. It's a completely different game. So, you know, this is quite a controversial topic because a lot of fire guys are fed up with seeing electricians do fire alarm installs and stuff like that, which you can kind of guess. But obviously, people who know me, I'm an electrical contractor, or was an electrical contractor. I'm an electrician by trade, and I was a fire alarm engineer. I've done both, so I've got, you know, competency in both areas. So I just wanted to sort of tell you how I'm going to break this video down, just to sort of keep it clear. And hello everybody who's saying hi on the chat. I want to break this video down into my history, the RRO, and if you don't know what that is, we'll find out in a minute. BS 5839, training, BAFE, and entry into the industry. So let's start with my history. So I trained as an electrician, done my electrical apprenticeship, all that sort of jazz. And on my company, just before I qualified, I worked for a company who had a division, an alarm division. So I was on the electrical and they had an alarm division. Now, it was mainly security stuff, but they did do fire alarms. So they had a couple of fire alarm engineers. But when they had bigger jobs in, they got us electricians to do the wiring, installations and stuff like that. And then they used to get the fire alarm guys in to come and commission. So being young and eager and ambitious and whatever, I always put my hand up and say I will do whatever. But whereas a lot of people really didn't want to work on fire alarms, so I was like, yeah, cool, I'll do it. And I worked all over the country installing fire alarm systems. You know, I've always worked with MICC, FP200 obviously is the main cable, but all sorts. I've worked on all sorts of systems. So for me, that worked quite well because I had guidance of the fire guys, and obviously as an electrician, installing cabling, you know, it sort of goes hand in hand, and that's why a lot of electricians start doing it. So I've always had a bit of a background in that kind of thing. But when I started up my company, which was 9 years ago now, we went for a contract. It's a large contract, and part of that was to take on the fire alarm. So took on the fire alarm maintenance contract for this very large, well-known organisation, and part of their requirement was to be BAFE. And at the time, I wasn't too familiar with BAFE and with the scheme or anything like that, and I'll go on to what it is. But long story short, I had to get the accreditation and go through the process. So I ended up getting this big maintenance contract, and actually realised very quickly there's a lot of money to be made in fire alarm systems, and actually really enjoyed the work. I enjoyed learning more about it, and you know, my business kind of grew in that direction, and you know, my knowledge, and I found it just really interesting. So, and you know, I've built relationships over time. So kind of that's my history. I don't really need to go into it too much, but I've done some amazing projects all over the UK, and I used to work in a lot of historical buildings. And you know, I look back, when you look back at a project, you're like, wow, fantastic. So anyway, that's my history. Right, so we're now going to talk about the RRO. Now, you need to know what the RRO is. It's the Regulatory Reform Order, which basically is a bit of UK legislation which sets out the procedures for fire safety in properties for design, installation, commissioning and maintenance. It's really important, so it's legislation. The RRO is actually a free document on the .gov UK website. If I remember, I'm going to put it in the descriptions below. It's something that if you're working on fire, you need to read, you need to understand. So hang on, let's, some people are writing some stuff in. Jack P, hello, how you doing? MS Security, how old do you have to be to work and experience with my old company? You'll have to ask them. I don't have anything to do with them any longer. So the RRO is free to download. Now, the bit that's relevant is, I think it's called Mandate 13, which basically says that the appropriate fire detection needs to be placed in a building. That's pretty much all it says, and that's legislation. So that kind of goes down to some people. The problem with any legislation like that that's a bit open-ended is down to interpretation. But long story short, a property, the responsible person needs to have a fire risk assessment done. Now, what you need to understand with fire alarms is that everything comes down to fire risk assessment. The fire risk assessment was the base, is completely the base. It all comes down to fire risk assessment. So a fire risk assessor, what they do is assess what level of detection or what is required. Now, what is called a category, which is basically the amount of detection you need in a building. So you've got different categories, L1, L2, L3, L4 and L5. So I'll briefly touch on them. L1, I'll start backwards. L4 is escape routes only. So it's anything that any part of the building you have to walk through to get out to safety. L3 is escape routes plus rooms off the escape routes. So it's basically any room connecting to an escape route that isn't an escape route, plus the escape routes. Then an L2 is everything I've just said, plus areas of high risk. Now, it's a risk assessor's job, fire risk assessor's job, to determine what is high risk. Then an L1 is everywhere. So it's detection everywhere. L5 is basically a bespoke system. So I mean, it's hard to explain what sort of buildings would have it, but again, it comes down to fire risk assessment, and it might be that it doesn't meet any of the L1 to L4 categories. Now, somebody who's competent needs to tell you what category it's done, and then you design a system based on that category. So without the fire risk assessment, without knowing the category, you're a bit banjaxed, because that's where things kind of go wrong. So it all comes down to, the fire risk assessment. But the RRO, bear in mind, it's a free document. It's not that big a document. But if you're working in fire safety, you need to read that. You need to understand it. You need to, familiarise yourself with that document and the relevant parts to you, because fire safety is a massive, massive industry filled with all different things that you see at sunrise now, like the sun's popping up. So if it gets a bit bright, I might have to turn this away. But the fire safety industry is huge in terms of what is connected with it, and everybody who's working in buildings needs to be aware of parts of fire safety. It's really important, because obviously if you're an electrician, you're punching holes through wall, you need to know fire compartments and just stuff about that, and there's all sorts of legislation in place. So but the RRO is the basis for fire safety. Now that's that's just obviously the first part. Now, I guarantee a lot of electricians who are working on fire alarm systems that I've come across haven't even heard of the RRO. Because I speak to people all the time and they're like, well, what's that? And it's like, you should know what it is. And again, it's free to download, nice and simple. So let's go on to, and we'll talk more about fire risk assessments in a little bit. So with a fire risk assessment, it needs to be done by a competent person. Now, what you get in some instances is you get a person who works for a company who owns the property could do a fire risk assessment, but they've got to be competent. That's the thing, they've got to be competent. Now, I've done a lot of courses on fire, all different aspects of fire, and I come across there's always fire risk assessors, in-house fire risk assessors, and basically they're people who have done admin or within a management role or something like that, who've been asked to also do the fire safety and be the responsible person. And they're doing their own risk assessments. Now, the problem with doing risk assessments is that when it comes to fire safety, anything that comes from the fire risk assessment, if the fire risk assessment is wrong, everything else is going to be wrong. So it needs to be right from the beginning. And it's worrying how many people are doing fire risk assessments for their buildings, within these organisations that are clearly clueless. They don't have a clue. Now, I'm not a fire risk assessor, but I do know a little bit about various aspects of fire. Now, there are actually on the gov.uk website, there's a whole list of guidance for fire risk assessments, all free. Again, you can all download, and it's for different types of properties, for education, health, general offices and stuff like that. There's different guidance. Now, no building is the same, because a fire risk assessment is about it's a big range of things. It's about the material, the materials, the building structure, the type of building, the escape routes, how easy it is to get out, what is stored in those buildings, and what it's used for, what time of day it's used for. There's so many different things with fire risk assessment, and it's a complete different trade, trade in itself. I couldn't just go in and do a fire risk assessment somewhere. So, but often what you get a drawing by an architect, or you get just a bit of paper from a client saying it's got to be this category or whatever. Now, that's fine as an installer point of view or designer, because because it's down to the client to get that done, and it's their responsibility. But personally, I think ethically, you need to, if you feel there's a shortfall in this fire risk assessment, you need to kind of highlight that to cover your backside as well, because what you need to know about fire is just like anything else. You need to cover your backside. It's all about covering your backside and making sure you're doing everything you are in your own way, because believe me, if there's a fire, it's all about traceability and where it comes back to. So you need to make sure that you're designing correctly. You need to make sure you're documenting everything. It's all about documentation. If you think in electrical there's a lot of paperwork, Jesus Christ, in fire there's so much more, believe me. So we talk about BS 5839 part 1 and part 6. Now again, you need to know the difference between the two. I'll start at part 6. Part 6 is dwellings. So it's a self-contained domestic residence as such. So it could be a flat within a block of building, like an apartment building or whatever, but it's the actual flat part that is the dwelling. It could be a private home. So there is a scope of what it actually covers, which it does state in part 6. Now part 1 is everything that isn't part 6. So for example, if you've got a block of flats, like, I don't know, high rise, 10 stories or something like that, the dwelling is the actual individual flat, but a stairwell is not. Now that is arguable. Now I've been on a course recently with somebody who said, they say they know part 1 and part 6 like the back of their hand, and they state it's quite clear that the stairwells are part 6. They're not. It's part 1. If you read the scope and the definition of what it comes under, they're two separate things. So, but you need to know the difference between the two, because what complies with part 6 doesn't necessarily comply with part 1. However, you can install. So part 1 is, I don't like to use the word commercial, because it can come under non-commercial areas as such. But part 1 is basically a full-blown fire alarm system, and this is kind of what we're talking about. Jonathan Steed fire alarm courses, I'm going to go on to that. So the part 6 and what detectors are allowed in part 6 are different, or not necessarily the same, of what will comply and meet the requirements of part 1. So that's why you tend to find your average smoke detectors in part 6. It doesn't mean they comply to the standards and recognition in part 1. And that's why that is simply the reason why you end up having fire alarm panels and the type of systems in part 1, because part 1 doesn't really come under sort of the domestic style, and I'm going to say the name ACO detectors. They don't come under the same thing, but it doesn't mean you can't use ACO detectors in a part 1 system. But that's going to be quite confusing. I'll probably do another video on something like that another time. But if you read what they're supposed to comply with, they are different. And don't get me wrong, you can have dwellings fire alarm systems, and you can have like a full-blown fire alarm system, a Chemtech panel or something like that with Apollo detectors in a part 6 system. They can like cross over, but you need to know the difference between the two. Now again, when I speak to a lot of electrical contractors and they say I'm installing fire alarm systems, and I say, have you familiarized yourself with BS 5839 part 1? And they basically tell me, oh no, I haven't got it. And I'm like, what the hell? How can you work installing systems? Because these are the standards that these systems are supposed to comply to. How can you install a system that you don't know how it's supposed to comply to? You need the regulations. Now, don't get me wrong. Hi Keith. Hi everybody else who's there you go. WLF Electrical. Hello. Right. Yeah. So you need to have the regulation, the standards. Now, the reason people say they don't have them is because they're expensive. Yes, they are expensive. Believe me, they're expensive. But to work in these industries, you need to know what rules, what guidance, and everything else you're supposed to be working to. You can't work on electrics under 7671 if you haven't got the wiring regulations. That's just ridiculous. You can't just go on hearsay. There's not enough public information out there that can tell you how to do how you're supposed to work and install systems. So if you're working on these systems, you need to get it. Now there's a number of ways you can get BS 5839 apart from the leak copies that everybody sends out on Facebook. Just saying, it happens a lot. But to get legitimate copies, you can. What I done ages ago was actually get a license with BSI, and you can download various different documents with BSI. So you get a personal license or a business license or something like that, and you can download various things. But I actually used to have my copy through a license through the SSAIB, and I'll go onto that more in a bit. But I paid, I can't remember how much it was. I think it's like £100 a year, I think it is, and you get you don't get. There's not too many BS documents, but it's everything that covers basically fire detection and emergency lighting, escape lighting, signage, that kind of thing. So £100 a year, that's nothing. It's nothing really in the grand scheme of things. Whereas if you used to buy the document on its own, I think it's really expensive. But you need it. You can't work on these systems without it. You need that document. And someone's pointed out that there's some leaked stuff about what's going to change in Part 6. As we all know, the British standards constantly change, constantly cost us money. But obviously, that's got to factor into your cost to the clients. Unfortunately, they're the ones who pay for it. So I'm going to talk about training. So someone said MS Security, there's an NIC book about fire systems. I haven't read it, if I'm honest. I haven't read that. I just read BS 5839. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to know. Everything else, like there are handy little guides. There's some apps as well that are out there that you can download as sort of reference. But really, like BS 5839 Part 1, it's not a big document. You can read the whole thing. It's nothing like 7671. So it's quite simple to read, but you need it. And I've never seen a simple. But it's like, for example, if you can't work on electrical systems just using the on-site guide. It doesn't work like that. It's exactly that, just a little handy book, a guide. But really, you need the big book. That's just my opinion. So we talk about training. People ask me about training all the time. This is like the most asked thing people ask me about fire alarms. How do I do training? So there's so many different ways you can train. And with training and competence and everything else that goes with it, obviously, you need to make sure that you demonstrate knowledge and experience. So there you go. Someone's 330 quid for Part 1. Oh, so much money. It's ridiculous. Serious amount of money. So training. There's so many different training courses out there. There's so many companies obviously flogging training and stuff like that. Now, obviously, I haven't got experience of doing training with every company training provider out there, so I'll talk you through like my training and just my opinions on some things. So a lot of people say to me right now, do I go to Searchshore, who charge, I think it's like there's a 2-day design course, there's an introduction to understanding fundamentals, which you usually have to do first, installation, maintenance, commissioning, handover, that kind of thing. So it breaks down into different modules. They say, should I do them or do I do the FIA UK training? Now, my personal opinion is that you should go to the FIA. The reason being, nothing against the Searchshore training as such, but the FIA UK are known for being the industry leaders in fire alarm training. They're just known for it. And their courses are different. Now, they are more expensive, but it's more elaborate. You get more for your money. And they go into quite a lot of detail. Now, I know fire alarm guys who have done the FIA UK training, and they've actually said it was quite difficult. It was actually quite intense, but that's good. It needs to be. It shouldn't just be you turn up to a course and you get a little certificate because you attended and showed your face. It should actually be quite tricky to pass, in my opinion, because these are life systems. This is what you've got to understand with fire alarm system. It's not just about installing a fancy detector on the ceiling and going, oh yeah, I installed that. If there's a fire, it needs to save somebody's life. Now, I've been involved in fires in the UK where there's been fires in properties, and I've had to come in as an outside source. I've also, properties that I've worked on and had maintenance have had fires, and Hi Gaz, how you doing? Love your videos, by the way. Yeah, so this is what you've got to understand, that these things save people's lives. And now I was in Canada not long ago, and I'm not too familiar with the Canadian standards, but the fire alarm went off in the middle of the night. Now I didn't wake up. It's my wife woke up, and it'd been going for quite some time apparently. Didn't hear it because I was asleep at night and there was no detection inside. Now, if there was a fire in that property, now we was on the 16th floor of this building. If there was a fire, we'd be screwed. We'd be screwed. If there's a fire in the main stair or something like that, be screwed. So, it's really important. People do die from fires. It does kill, and that's why we're doing this. We're doing it to save people's lives. So the training needs to be right. Now, even when you do these courses, you're still not competent, in my opinion, because it's all about the practical demonstration. And the biggest issue with working in fire is that just anybody can go and do it. Literally anybody can. And the amount of systems I've come across that are just utter crap, if I'm honest. You find a lot of electricians who are installing fire alarm systems, and they're using to whatever guides they're finding. But okay, they may install the cabling very well, install the detection and everything else, but it doesn't meet the standards necessarily. And that's kind of the problem, because with smoke detection, it's all about where you site it and how you site it, because ceiling levels, for example, I get given 2D drawings all the time and say, can you design this fire alarm system? And it's like all fair and well, but if you don't know the ceiling heights and how the ceiling's going to be, if there's obstructions, the whole design is wrong. And the other thing is like, you're supposed to quite liaise with manufacturers, because although a lot of detection is quite similar, it's similar, there are differences between them, and you can liaise between manufacturer, and it can differ depending on what it is, especially things like beam detectors and more non-standard stuff. So it's important to know what you're installing and why. And when you're designing it, this is the thing, systems fail when the design is incorrect. If a design is incorrect, the installation is correct, the commissioning is correct, incorrect, everything else is incorrect. You'll find that when you're maintaining things, you can find defects and it can be incorrect. So it needs to be designed from the start correctly. So going back to training, I highly recommend speaking to the FIA. It's expensive, but then you're working on life systems, it's going to cost, and you're paying for the additional amount of time. Because what I also find is people do like one of the module courses with another training provider, and it might be the installer module, and they're like, oh, I can install fire alarm systems now. I disagree that you should be doing it. Now, for me, the way it worked for me is that I worked for a company who had fire alarm people, commissioning engineers and everything else, and designers who would instruct me what to do and overlook what I'd done as the installation. And then I started getting into more of the commissioning process, and then I got into, obviously, like maintenance is pretty straightforward, to be honest, if you know commissioning, and then design. So I feel like if anybody wants to install fire alarm systems, if you're like a one-man band or a contractor doing it, I think it's fine, but I think you should work with a fire alarm company who's overseeing what you're doing, who's actually willing to put their name on paper as well to the system. So I used to subcontract to other companies and vice versa. So I used to subcontract to electrical contractors and also fire alarm companies doing any aspect that they wanted us to do, whatever. Like they might do the design, we'd do the installation and commissioning and everything else that goes with it. So I think it's important to start out working, getting experience like you would apprenticeship, getting experience by somebody who is competent and who can oversee and is willing to put their name to your work. I think that's the way forward, but also you need to do your training, but it doesn't just stop there with your FIA training, for example, manufacturer training. Do you know how to install certain type of equipment? Because even Apollo, for example, like you'll get instructions, but you need to know how things are connected up. Now, a fire alarm system can be installed, the panel will all be A-OK, but it doesn't mean it's installed correctly at all. And I'll give you an example. It's when you're working on non-addressable systems, for example, when it relies on polarity, the correct polarity, you can install, say, a conventional system, Apollo detectors, a Kentech panel. It can be installed, it can work, the detectors can go off, but it doesn't mean it's installed correctly. And what I mean is, what you're supposed to do with commissioning, you're supposed to take all your heads down, all of the heads down, so they're all off. It'll be in fault, and let's say there's a call point at any part of the system. Set your call point off, and the fire alarm system should still go off. Now, if it's wired incorrectly, for example, and you take a head down, it won't go off. Or it might do something a bit funny if polarity is incorrect somewhere and it's not connected correctly. It's vital. But from the outset, you might install a system and go, oh, the panel says it's okay, so it's okay. Not true. There's so much more than that, and that's why you need to know this, because, for example, I've had an instance where detectors have been removed and the panel doesn't say it's in fault, but the user is like, doesn't know any different. But when I've gone in and done maintenance and checked, there's been issues, and it's not working correctly. And if there was a fire, they would, oh God, I just got a fly on me. Did you see that? There will be a shortfall. So training is really, really important, and I strongly advise talking to the FIA UK. It's expensive, yes, but it's more expensive, believe me, if somebody dies because of the system that you've installed is incorrect. Believe me. Now, on the other end of the scale here, it's the same. If somebody goes in and just does the FIA courses and they're not an electrician, I think that's a problem as well, because the cabling still comes under BS 7671, under the electrical wiring regulations. It still comes under it. And sometimes what you find is you'll find people who aren't electricians who install cabling, and it's rubbish, it's crap. The way you install it is terrible. It doesn't look great, it doesn't meet standards, it's not clipped correctly, it's not using the right thing. So I think there's always a combination. And I do feel, when you're assessed for third-party accreditation, a lot of them, when you're installing, will ask for electrical qualifications. And also, when you're installing power supplies for fire alarm systems, you shouldn't be touching mains, for example, if you're not competent to work on that, because of safe isolation, making sure it is correct, all your values correct, installed in the right breakers, installed the right cabling, the cable sizing. It's really important. So I think there's always got to be a combination. This is why I think electricians can be fantastic in installing fire alarm systems. Mm-hmm. They need the basis of being an electrician, and then they can go into, obviously, the more specific fire alarm stuff that covers under BS 5839. So I think it's a combination. And I meet some fire alarm installers who are fantastic. Like, they might just do maintenance, for example, but doesn't mean that they're competent in installations, because they don't know the cable inside, the wiring regulations. There is a difference there. So I do think it's a combination. But I look at fire alarm industry, it's a different industry to electrical, and it's something that you can do additionally. It's not something that you're qualified as an electrician and, oh, I can install that now. It's an additional thing. So there's all sorts of training out there. I've done the FIA UK training. I found it great. The FIA are actually a really good company. You can get the courses cheaper if you become a member. Now, when I was a member, you could just become a member, but now you have to be approved by a third party, or have third party accreditation, i.e. BAFE, for example. So it's a little bit more tricky, because it's a double-edged sword, because you can't get BAFE without the right training. It's really difficult. But it depends on who's assessing your third party accreditation. They might tell you ways that they'll be happy with, as long as you've got things in a process. So I got my accreditation before I had fully completed my training, but I demonstrated that I had the sufficient knowledge. I just hadn't done the training. But I think if you're just starting from scratch, you need to have the training initially, because how can you demonstrate that you have sufficient knowledge? You can't. So it's difficult. It is a tricky one to get into, but this is why I think you work with a fire alarm company, work with them, subcontract, ask for guidance. And sometimes it can be a little bit expensive, but again, it's life safety systems. They need to be correct, because if somebody dies, somebody goes to jail. Because what happens is, when there is a fire and a fire occurs, if someone died, obviously there'll be prosecution, or someone will be looking to be prosecuted. But even if the building was damaged, the insurance will usually, it's a paper trail, and it's just a blame game. Who can we blame? Who didn't do their job properly? And it's a complete minefield. That's why you've got to do everything that covers your backside. And by providing you've got training, I'm just going to move this around because it's really bright. So you've got to make sure that you've got the correct training. So I talk about BAFE. Now people say, oh, what do you think about BAFE? Now, first of all, you need to understand what BAFE is. BAFE is a scheme. It's basically a document of procedures. So what it does, again, it's free. It's a free scheme that you can download off their website. And basically what it does is set out what you should do as a fire alarm detection and alarm company, and how you should carry out your business, basically. Now, and then what you are done, you are audited by a third-party company, i.e. the SSAIB, Searchable, I think BSI do it, NSI, there's a few different companies who come out and basically ensure that you're working to the BAFE scheme, which is, hello, more people coming on, yeah, making sure you are working to the BAFE scheme. So you have to provide evidence that you meet the whole requirement of BAFE, the whole document. Again, it's not a big document. Now, there's a lot of controversy about BAFE. A lot of people don't have trust in it. A lot of fire alarm guys are like, oh, anybody can be BAFE these days, so there's nothing special about it. Now, I'll tell you my honest opinion about BAFE. I like it because it's a good set of procedures. Without a decent set of procedures, what do you have? It's just the wild, wild west. It's anybody's game. Anybody can do what they want. Whereas if you're being documented, and what I also liked is being audited by somebody, because I was a director of a company. I was the one basically in charge of making sure we're doing all our jobs correctly. Like, who's making sure I'm doing my job correctly? And it's kind of a bit of it's insurance for yourself, and making sure. Now, in all honesty, I was only BAFE because I had that company who originally asked for it, and two of my biggest clients said they required BAFE. Now, one of them was quite rigorous about it. The other one didn't even check. But they said I just needed to have it. So would I have it now? Would I get the accreditation? It depends commercially if I think it was viable. If clients felt it was required for whatever reason. But in all honesty, if I was to set up my own company now, not that I'm going to, I know the BAFE scheme very well. I know the procedures. I agree with the procedures. I'd be happy to work to the procedures without having to pay the massive money to go through it, because I'm quite self-aware of what should be done. But I think it's good for organisations. It's good practice to have it, just because it's an auditing trail. It kind of gives your customers a bit of a quality assurance as well. But obviously there's shortfalls, because just because you've got BAFE, again, it's like anything. You can take your assessor, your auditor, to any job that you like. It's not like they go to see every single one. So you could have 100 men working for you, and really you're just showing them 1% of what you're doing, which could be all up to scratch, but the 99% could be a load of dog shit. And it happens. There's some big organisations out there. I won't name any names because I'll probably receive some nasty legal letters. But there's some of the biggest organisations out there installing dog shit work. Honestly, it's awful. They don't meet standards, and that's why a lot of people in the fire industry are like, oh, BAFE doesn't mean anything. But to me, I think it just comes down to self-discipline and what you want to do. And it's really important to make sure that you are doing everything yourself. So I mean, because I business coach now, a lot of people come to me and they're like, I want to make sure I'm doing procedures right. Can you help me with my procedures, my documentation and stuff like that? And I mean, that's great. They're willing to pay somebody else to come and help and check them for their stuff. And that's kind of how I view BAFE, if I'm honest. So I was actually audited by the SSAIB, and I can't praise them enough, if I'm honest. The guys there, they're a small team of guys, but they're really helpful. Their technical knowledge is just unbelievable. And for me, it was another source of help. So if I needed a second opinion on something, there's somebody I can go to. I used to go to the FIA. They've got their technical guy there, Will, absolutely fantastic. Then the SSIB guys, fantastic. Everybody who works for them is fantastic, who I've come across. And they really do help. Now, there's different, obviously, routes you can go into, but I do recommend speaking to the SSIB as an auditor. They're harsh, trust me, they're harsh, but it's for a good reason. It's to ensure that you are doing your job correctly. So I highly sing their praises. I'm not being paid or anything to do that. It's just my genuine opinion. I really enjoyed it. And even though some parts of when I had my business, I didn't need to be BAFE, I actually still enjoyed having them auditing me. I know that sounds really weird. It was actually always a really nice day out. So, because we just chat, technical rubbish, proper geeks. I really liked it and look forward to it. So I do recommend that. So I want to talk about entry into the industry, and I've kind of covered a lot of this before. So a lot of electricians say, how do I get into it? So there's a process here. You need to get your knowledge up to scratch on the different aspects that I've said about how fire alarm systems work, and it's different to electrics to some extent, but documentation is much more rigorous with fire alarm systems, just because of that life safety aspect. Although arguably, electrics kill people too. But for me, it was CJR Electrical. Where am I living now? I'm living on a beach, mate, in Australia. There you go. This is where I'm living. Over there that you can see, that's where I'm living, in a van. And it's the morning, sunrise. It's beautiful. Bit chilly this morning though. So people working on fire alarm systems, you can really mess up a fire alarm system if you don't know what you're doing. And I see so many poor systems where people come along and start tampering with it. It's not straightforward. Like, for example, an addressable system. If you take a head down and put a new head up, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. It's okay. It depends on the manufacturer, but you usually have to tell the panel that you've changed something. And if you don't do that, that detector might not work. So, training is everything. I recommend doing the FIA UK training, definitely, as a start, purely as a start. I recommend getting experience on site, working with a fire alarm company, subcontracting, doing some installations for them. It may cost you a little bit of money in the short term, but make sure that they're helping you and guide you on how to install systems. Because, for example, the issue you find on site is that it's the installer is the person who usually finds the shortfalls. It's not the designer. It should be the commissioning engineer, but usually it's the installer is the first person that finds the shortfalls. And what it is because you're installing the system and you'll come up for example, you might find an extra big void, for example, that needs detection. Now, it's down to you to then go back to the designer and say, oh, there's an extra void. And then it's down to the client to agree, oh yes, we'll install a detector. If not, it's a variation, but it's an agreed variation. Now, when you install a system and it's designed, you can have variations, but what a lot of people do is use it as a bit of a get-out clause. Now, it's got to be a client that agrees the variation, because they're responsible for the system. Just because you've installed it doesn't mean you're responsible. They are responsible ultimately for their building, for the life safety, and that's what comes under the RRO. That's why it is relevant. And they need to agree the variation, but you can't just go, oh, we're not putting a detector there because he doesn't like it because he's in the way of his fancy lights. Sometimes you need to go, additional. So, for example, in pubs, it's common practice not to put call points by the final exits in the public areas because they keep getting smashed, and obviously false alarms are a problem. So what you might do is have it behind staff areas. So that's an additional measure you've made. Instead of just going, no, screw it, we're not going to have it, you install an additional one somewhere else. Or it might be that if it's a really awkward ceiling and you put a detector up, it's about finding the better place, because you'll come across all the time where you've got like a corridor, for example, and there's obstructions, there's lights everywhere, and there's never an ideal place to put it. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can kind of come up with, again, it comes down to risk assessment, and this is why someone needs to know what they're doing. It could be that you install additional detectors to compensate, or you install it in the least worst place, but you need to know, you need to have knowledge. You can't just go bomp, there it goes, because detectors might not necessarily work if they're installed in a certain way, and this is where you need to go back to manufacturers and check with the manufacturers. So I think training is important, experience is important, I do think you should be audited by somebody, especially in the early days. Get audited by somebody that you might not get the accreditation, but you're still going to be audited. You're still paying somebody to sort of help you and guide you along the way. So I think that's important. And also building relationship with manufacturers. So I always work really closely with a lot of manufacturers. But the great thing about them, a lot of these manufacturers provide free CPD. I'm sorry if you get, like, it's really noisy. All the birds are suddenly woken up and they're causing a right old racket. There's a lot of manufacturers that provide free training. For example, you can go to events. It's completely free because they want you to install their equipment. And and they're the ones who really know, because like Apollo, for example, they have on their addressable range, they've got a few different types of equipment, and they all work in different ways. So obviously you've got XP95, which is kind of like entry level. You've got Discovery, which is sort of the next thing up, and then you've got their new range out, and Soteria, and they all do slightly different things, and that's why they cost slightly different amounts. But you need to be aware, because you might find an instance where XP95 isn't suitable. You might want to use Soteria. So for example, I'll give you a fantastic example. I installed a massive system, all Discovery, everywhere's Discovery. Kept getting problems with flies going into the detector, because it's quite open, so there's a lot of animals and bugs that come in. I see someone say Hichiki, usually your Hichiki, Apollo, whatever. They do similar things, and I've always liked Apollo, only because I'll tell you about Apollo. It's just because I've built such a good relationship with Apollo, and for me, like, the experience I've had from Apollo is fantastic. I had an issue where they had a bit of a batch of dodgy manual call points, and the client said to me, "Oh, it's getting jammed," when they were testing it. So they would test it and they couldn't reset it. Apollo, no qualms, come out and replace the whole lot for free. They just come out and do it. It's part of their guarantee and warranty, and it's their name. I've had an instance before where there was an actual fire in a property, and the smoke detector was about 2 foot. It was melting off the scene where it was on fire, and it come down like it was still working. This is the thing, it was still working, and Apollo offered to me to come out and replace that detector for free, because they're like, it's still under their warranty, it's done its job, but we'll replace it for free. I mean, how good is that for an organisation? But obviously, they're all quite similar, if I'm honest. They've all got, have their ups and downs, but it's about building relationships. And sometimes it can be where you're stationed in part of the country, because Apollo were never too far from where I was, so it's quite easy to go and see them. But it's important to build up, relationships with the manufacturers. And CJR, depends who gives me the best backhanders, mate. Tongue in cheek, but where it comes to safety, honestly, that doesn't come into it. Excuse me. And obviously, I think it's important to continue doing CPD. There's a lot of stuff online that is free. A lot of the manufacturers do. Is that vodka? I don't drink, mate. And bear in mind, it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. A lot of manufacturers do free training, and they want you to kind of work in the systems. Kentech, for example, have got their new panel out, the Tactis. You can't just go and buy Tactis. You have to be approved. You have to do training and prove that you can work on the system. And it's all time, investment, and money. So there is a lot of money to be made in fire alarm systems if done correctly. It was a big part of my business. In fact, I openly say this, made more profit on jobs from fire alarm systems and electrical any day of the week. Because the thing is, there's so many electricians in the country, there's so many of them. And there's also a lot of fire alarm installers, but there's less fire alarm installers than there are electricians, and it is a bit of more of a niche market. And I think it's because, although systems can be worked on quite easily, and a lot of people do work on systems, like, Twinflex, for example, you see them everywhere. But when you get sort of more complicated systems, you have to be approved installers for a lot of systems, like a lot of Honeywell products and stuff like that. You have to be approved, which means paying them a lot of money and doing training. And there's a lot of like Twinflex, for example. A lot of people say to me, is Twinflex a good brand? Now, the truth is, it complies, it does the job. My issue with Twinflex is the stigma that's attached to it, because you can buy it off the shelves in electrical wholesalers. So what happens is you can buy a little kit and you can go install it. So what we tend to find is that the Twinflex installations are done by electricians, and they don't meet standards. They're just, you know, bung in. They don't meet any requirements. They haven't followed the procedure that we talk about in the RRO of, you know, things supposed to be designed and a set of procedures. And there's a stigma, but the truth is, it does the job. It does the job. I always quite dislike the panels because they're quite cheap and horrible. Well, the older style anyway. They got a new style out, and the buttons used to get stuck quite a lot, and that's why I was never a massive fan of the C-Tech panel as well, because I used to forever changing the buttons and replacing the buttons. But it's what you're used to. Like, I used to like Kentech quite a lot. Again, I built up a good relationship with Kentech. A little bit more expensive than some of the panels, but like the things that it can do is incredible. Like, really incredible. So what I think is important when you do fire alarm systems, so you have a fire risk assessment done, and they decide what category is supposed to be installed and what grade, although I won't go into grades, what category is supposed to be installed, and then you design, you install, you commission, and then you hand over. Right? They're different parts, and there's different elements to it. And so what somebody said there, as far as Part 6 go, ACO for their customer service, yeah, honestly, ACO are a fantastic company. They are fantastic products. They work really closely with you. So for Part 6, yeah, ACO, without a shadow of a doubt. Now, I've had some people trying to sell ACO products because they've got, I've forgotten the name of it now, but it's like an interface module, which is fantastic. And they're trying to say that they want to interlink, you know, ACO systems. Now, the problem is there's parts of Part 1 that don't recognise the standards that ACO work to, and this is the difference between Part 1 and Part 6. And that's why it's a little bit of a grey area. It doesn't mean that it won't work and it doesn't do the job, but they are slightly different. And the thing is, if you install something that doesn't strictly comply to the guidance of BS 5839 or 6 or whatever, whoever's the person who made the choice for it to be installed is liable if there's a shortfall. Do you really want to be the person who takes responsibility for the shortfall? Like, that's what you got to ask yourself. So if not, you stick to the guidance unless you've got sufficient, you know, competence to know otherwise. That's kind of how I view that. But yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, domestic, I had domestic ACO detectors in my old house, without a shadow of a doubt. Fantastic bit of kit, really good. And again, like, if they go 40, they just replace them, they don't argue. So yeah, it's a tricky one, because to get that experience, you need to build that you need to start installing them. But I don't think people should just start doing them off the back of their head. And even the smallest of systems, it might be a small retail unit with, you know, I don't know, let's say 5 rooms or something like that. See shortfalls in the system there, because it needs to meet a category, and then how do you know what category it's supposed to meet unless it's been fire risk assessed properly and you install into that category? It may seem quite simple, but the amount of fire alarm installers who are electrical contractors who haven't even got the BS 5839 is astonishing, absolutely astonishing. It all costs money, it's all investment, and I'm glad this is a thing. It's quite easy just to get into and just start installing these systems, but you've just got to be conscious that if they do not work, somebody could die. It is literally that simple. And the thing is, like, let's say you are maintaining the system, you get a call out and you go and work on a panel and you end up doing something and you have to disable something for an amount of time. Now, bear in mind, if a fire occurs and it's got no fire detection equipment because it's been disabled, guess what's going to happen and who the blame's going to be put on when that happens. So it might be the case that you can't repair something there and then, but you've got to get into a position, and this is part of BAFE actually. It requires you to hold stock of various detectors, and you need to build a relationship with you know, manufacturers, suppliers, so you can get the equipment like that. So for me, when I had an issue, quite often we would stock parts. Even if it meant I had to get a courier out from my London office to, I don't know, Coventry, for example, I would do it. Even though the courier cost quite a lot of money, we would do it. We would get it done. It's important to make sure that you go home making sure a system's working, because if the system isn't working, you then have to put additional measures in place. But this is the thing, it's the client's responsibility to coordinate all of this under the RRO. It's their responsibility, but a lot of them don't. And that's where I think, as an installer, a design company, a maintenance company, you need to go above and beyond and point out at any shortfalls, because then you've covered yourself. So let's say, for example, a system was banjaxed and they didn't want to, like, the panel's down and they didn't want to pay for a new panel. They're like humming and hawing, we've got to try and find the money. I think it's important to basically say to, you can't do things for free, but you could say to them, your system does not work. You do not have life detection. We can install temporary detectors as a temporary measure just to help out, but it is temporary. But you have to instruct us, and obviously you need to pay us for the work. And if they don't respond to you or they don't agree, that's down to them. The responsibility then goes back down to them. And this is the thing, correspondence and paperwork is so important. And what I loved about being BAFE registered and accredited by the SSIB is that actually because it's quite a strict criteria of your paperwork, it helped me with my electrical side, because I changed my electrical procedures. Because the truth is, when I was NIC accredited, their quality management system is crap compared to something that's required for BAFE. Like, what do you need? You need technical documents, you need a complaints procedure, you need insurance, you need to prove that you can do the work on site, and you're documenting the jobs that you're doing, and your certification. That is it. That literally is it. Whereas with fire, you're supposed to document if you're not turning up to site within 8 hours. You're supposed to document your maintenance if you're not doing the maintenance on time. You document your inquiries, you document your installations, all the people who come under it, ID, company, who works for you. They document who's working for you, who does what, who's got what role, what qualifications people have. The quality management system for the BAFE, for me, was a great learning curve, because to the point now, I'm actually coaching some of my clients, and some of them come to me because they want to improve their procedures, which I've said. Now, I've designed a quality management system based on my experience and what I used to do in the past, and it's a set down thing of what you record. You record inquiry, the client's details, you vet the client, you then do the, you kind of like find out the specification, you do the survey, you do the quote, the design, everything that goes with it, and you document every single thing. And the reason you do that is because as long as you've done everything within your job, whether it's electrical, fire, as long as you documented everything and you've done everything you're supposed to under the guidance, right? If it comes to court and you're standing in court, or there's a fire, or even if your own conscience, right, you're being blamed for something, you can hold out all your paperwork in a nice orderly file and go, boom, there you go, there's evidence that I'm not guilty of this. I've done everything I'm supposed to within my job. That's kind of the difference. That's the difference. And that's why I'm doing this quality management system, and I'm working with a couple of my clients now where we're working on this system, and this is what I like. And you can utilize that system whether you're working on fire or whatever. It's about documenting. And also, it can, as long as you document everything on any job, any project, it can also help you with payments and stuff like that, because it kind of prompts you to make sure that you're getting your purchase order, you're making sure that you're getting the confirmation on your variations, and it kind of prompts you to make sure you're doing these things and properly. It might seem a lot of work, but believe me, I know a lot of people who aren't being paid for jobs. I know a lot of people who are being blamed for work, being taken to court. It's about documenting and evidence. And even under the electricity work regulations, you're supposed to document what you're doing and why. And I just feel generally with electrical work in general, and even fire, a lot of people don't do it properly, and they're open to abuse. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to conclude this now. I've been rambling on. I hope it has helped some of you guys. I hope it sort of helps, like with my sort of experience as well, and kind of what I feel about certain training with BAFE, with electricians generally working on fire. I think it's important to make sure competency is there before you start doing it. Not hindsight is a nasty thing. So thanks for watching this video. I'm going to be doing more live videos because I'm getting a lot of requests. So if you've got a request for a topic to talk to me about, please let me know. Put it in the comments below, and I shall see you on another video. And today, well, I'm actually moving from where we are today. We're heading more north to Sydney, and I've got some exciting stuff coming up, so stay tuned.